great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Oh, Taina, I'll do about a cameo, 30-second intro.
Sure thing.
And hey, Rami, when you run the new business piece, in effort to make myself relevant.
You're always relevant, Peter.
Oh, that's what I was waiting for. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
As a younger brother, I like to get an informal conversation. As a younger brother, the youngest of four, it wasn't always obvious that I was relevant. And I can actually remember at the age of about 6 at the Sunday dinner table that when I opened my mouth and actually spoke, nobody picked up on what I had to say. So I basically stopped talking and just paid attention to what other people were saying. So, we all adapt to our own challenges. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Again, as part of the informal conversation, I'm actually very both interested and kind of excited about this session. First of all, the admissions issues are, as everything going on with education right now, so important to kind of clarify and help people understand, what's going on and how to navigate the current version of that process. And then I'm equally interested and delighted to have our participants in the new business section, the dual language initiative, which we will discuss in conjunction with the universal literacy, as complementary ways that we can bring together to strengthen the early education of our young people. And there's nothing that I personally consider more important than that. And then also the proposal to diversify our narrative to include diverse perspectives and backgrounds and peoples of all diverse backgrounds in the literature and the material that they see when they go to school, to reinforce that we are an inclusive society and community. And I'm tempted to say that may sound like, not necessarily the most important thing, but let me tell you, as the fourth son of 4 sons, being included is very important, and I remember that. And I don't mean to say that lightly. I'm tempted as a teacher to always go and tell you more than you need to know, but I'm going to try not to get into in any great depth the fact that my mother had a nervous breakdown when I was 4 years old, and she went away, and I didn't know what happened. I thought she had died. And I don't say that to be dramatic. I only say that to try to explain for myself why I feel so passionate about seeing to it that nobody gets left out. I mean, I obviously must still be recovering from feeling left out. She did come back a number of months later, and I had a wonderful mother and I had a wonderful upbringing. But that was certainly, my wife assures me that was probably traumatic. Great. Well, it's now 6:30.
So I'm just going to jump right in real quick, Peter, if that's okay. I just have to let everyone know that you will remain muted throughout the presentation. And to participate, which there'll be an opportunity to later, you can go to the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen and click that, and you'll see a button called raise hand, and that's how you will let us know you want to participate. Once you raise your hand, you'll have to unmute. If you're on the phone, it's *6 to raise your hand and *9 to unmute. Now, right ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Max.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to turn it over momentarily to Taina. Now do we pronounce your name Sadie Kempoamore? Thank you. And we should unmute.
Right.
Yes, thank you. Unmute Sadie because she's very important to this session. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, Elizabeth, thank you for joining us. And I will simply turn it over to Taina to run this session on admissions in our middle schools and high schools. So thank you all for joining us. Taina?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone who is joining, either in the Zoom or via live stream. We're really excited to have this conversation, and especially excited to be joined today by two very, very well-informed individuals on the topic. First, Sadie Campoamor, who Peter mentioned. Sadie, thank you so much for joining. Sadie joins us from the Department of Education, where she has worked for about 7 years. She is the Community Affairs Borough Manager in the Division of Community Empowerment and Communications, and just has a wealth of knowledge to share with us. So we're really excited to have Sadie. And we are also joined by our very own Elizabeth Rose, who is a fellow board member here on Community Board 8, but of particular relevance for this conversation, spent nearly a decade at the Department of Education in a variety of roles, most recently as CEO of school operations, and has insight that she can share both from that experience at the Department of Education, as well as her own sort of personal experience as a parent navigating through the treacherous process of admissions here in New York City. And so I'm going to get this started just to give everyone a little bit of context of how this will run. We will spend some time, I will be doing a Q&A, asking questions to each of our two guests, panelists, for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we will open it up to the broader group to ask questions. And so without further ado, I want to start with Sadie. I think we are going to get into some more specific questions that are relevant to our specific community board area and neighborhood of the Upper East Side. But we thought it would be helpful if you could provide just sort of a 30,000-foot overview of really what the Department of Education's changes have been in terms of the admissions landscape for middle schools and high schools.
Sure. I just want to lift up that I'm joined by my colleague from the Office of Student Enrollment, who will also be supporting me if we want to get into the weeds on any admission stuff, just because two minds is always better than one. So I want to welcome him, and his name is Andrew McClintock, and he is also here and will need to be able to unmute himself if possible. And hi, Elizabeth.
Hi,
Nice.
Sadie. So good to see you.
Long time. So good evening, everybody. I'm actually the Director of Community Affairs, so lead community affairs for the agency, and manage a beautiful team who is divided by borough, but I'm really excited to be here and welcome your questions and interesting dialogue, of course. So first things first, we've all, been through dealing with a pandemic, and it has laid bare a lot of different inequities and has changed our system fundamentally, right? Since March 16th, when we made the very difficult decision to close our schools, that change shifted everything from operations to how we did regional enrichment centers at the time. So certainly school planning to grading policy, right? We didn't have the same types of grades. New York State regents had been suspended. New York State had suspended NISLATs, which is our other forms of tests that discuss the aptitude of English language learners. And so all of that sort of leads into admissions. And so I just wanted to start to make sure everybody understood that grades, attendance, access to devices, access to logging in, all of the things that we're all dealing with as a global community, but also very local to our city schools, impacted this decision, right? It also laid bare a lot of inequities, right? Because we know that there were certain communities across the city that were hit much more gravely than others. And so we want to make sure that whatever changes we make are always grounded in excellence, but academic excellence is academic equity for our families. Those aren't two separate things. It's not one or the other. And we know just alone this year that our students of color are 4 times more likely to not enter a school building than their white peers. So I just want to sort of 30,000 feet up, recognize that this global pandemic has deeply impacted our schools and our families. And so I come to you today as a public school parent and a public school graduate, and with the sensitivity and humanity that it takes, and not just a bureaucrat, to make these changes and to think about all of our students. So We have, because of not having grades in the same way and not having even attendance grades, behavioral grades, all of that from spring and even through this year as well, we had to make really critical decisions about how we were going to manage middle school, high school, and even elementary school admissions. And so just to give you a frame of reference, normally parents would come into school in September and almost immediately be able to apply for high school. And then following that, usually at the top of October, would be able to apply for middle school. That's not been the case. We just opened it up. So every little nook and cranny of our system was touched by this global pandemic. And so we also know that folks have lost folks. And so also want to hold space for the grief that we're all sort of navigating together every single day. So in essence, we wanted to make sure that we heard from a lot of different people. So throughout the spring, we actually did a listening tour of, I know personally, I sat through about 3 dozen, but I'm sure there were also citywide events where we really listened to families, to advocates, to teachers, to principals about what would make sense. How could we do admissions when we knew that we didn't have the same data sets that we might need that we have used in the past. And we also wanted to lift up again the opportunity to think what is the fairest and most equitable process for admissions given the global pandemic that our students and our families were going through. So in essence, in middle school, we're putting a pause on all middle school screens. There's all different types of screens, and we can get into that in a moment. But this means that students applying to middle school will not be selected based on previously used screen criteria. There are 196 middle schools in New York City that use academic screens, metrics with which applicants are sorted and selected for admissions decisions. These screens, which I keep referring to, can include grades, can include student interviews, school-based assessments, behavioral evaluations, standardized test scores, and attendance, right? And again, noting that our standardized tests in the spring were canceled and behavioral evaluations weren't the same. Same with attendance and grades, because we did change the grading policy. So instead, families will still be choosing based on choice. So whatever your first choice would be last year would still be your first choice this year, unless your child, wanted to change it. But we're asking folks to still rank their choices in their middle school application as they always have. But we just simply aren't using the same as, again, academic screens criteria that they'd be using. And instead, students will be chosen by a lottery-based system. And the district priorities for our middle schools still applies. Okay, and that announcement was for 1 year and 1 year only. And before we get into the weeds on what that means and what criteria we'll use, I want to just talk a little bit about high schools. So high schools, we have about 400 plus high schools in the city, and they will keep their screens, keep all the academic screens that I just listed, but the only big change will be the district priority for high schools. So there's 3 different types of geographic priorities. There's zone, there's borough-based, and then there's district-based. This year, year 1, or this specific year, this admissions period right now is the change is that district priorities, and that of course applies to District 2, District 2 priorities for high school admissions will be permanently eliminated this year, okay? And all other geographic priorities will be eliminated next year. The phase out over 2 years will start with 48 high schools. So those are some of the high schools in your community. And then about approximately 250 high schools have some sort of geographic priority in place. We asked a lot of different principals about this. There was a range. In essence, I'll say that there are a lot of specialty high schools, and we wanted to make sure that students wanted to be in those types of programs. But the academic screens, because we know that it was really important to principals and community members for this year, will remain. And we'll have to revisit this question because we will still be faced with the same type of open questions around grading and data sets that aren't missing this year. So same as middle schools, if your student or your child wants to apply to high school, we still want them to rank them based on choice. But if your child lists a screen school on their high school application, it'll be a combination of 2018, 2019 state tests, So the previous year's grades and or a different school established criteria. I don't want to talk at you all evening, but I wanted to give you a high level sort of view. Andy, did I miss anything critical on that piece? I know that there'll be a lot of questions.
Hi, everyone. I don't think so, but I'm interested in hearing what questions folks have, and happy to kind of help clarify some things if there are some questions.
Great. So that was enormously helpful. Thank you, Sadie. Thank you, Andrew. I have a few more questions that like I said, that I'll ask you, and I'm going to turn to Elizabeth in a moment. But before I do, Sadie, if you could, or Andrew, either. Thank you, Andrew, for joining. Talk a little bit about, so it sounds like, thank you for sort of clarifying that the middle school changes are temporary, or at least they sound temporary sort of for now, for 1 year, which is very different than the high school changes. So for the high school changes that seem to be a bit more permanent, can you talk a little bit about how the Department of Education plans to sort of measure the success of these changes, sort of vis-a-vis what impact these changes are having on communities and families and school leaders?
I think Sadie, are you muted?
Sadie is muted.
I know.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I have a child, so I'm go on mute so we can keep the noise level, the background noise level down. But the question was that the geographic priorities that we're discussing are more permanent, and what are the measures of success? And I think in essence, and my colleagues can, Elizabeth, always a colleague, once a colleague, always a colleague, can jump in. But in essence, the spirit is, we want to reduce barriers to get into our schools. We want to increase access to our schools. We have great schools across the city. We have wonderful schools in District 2. We've had a number of conversations with the school leaders in District 2 over the past, I would say, 4 years. I've been at the DOE for about 7 years. Certainly they've come and gone, but I think the success is, are we providing more access to students? Are we lessening barriers to get into our wonderful schools that we have in the city, but certainly District 2. Full disclosure, I'm a District 2 graduate. And so I think that is the real measure of success. I don't think we were looking at any particular marker other than, when more students get opportunities for academic excellence, that's not only the most equitable outcome, but also the most excellent outcome for our public school system.
Thank you. So to switch it up a bit, Elizabeth, I'd love to hear sort of your reflections, you having really intimate knowledge of our context here on the Upper East Side and in District 2. If you could just give your initial reflections on sort of all of these changes and the impact you would imagine this would have on our local communities, our families and students.
Sure. So thank you very much for having me as a kind of panelist today. Sadie, it is always good to see you. And yes, once a colleague, always a colleague. I asked to be a panelist today on this because while I was at the DOE, literally throughout all of my time there and in all of my different roles, every spring and summer brought the same experience every single year. And that was that every single year there was some number of families, primarily from the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. Those were the primary groups of people who came into this situation, who were frantic, literally frantic. They're high achieving, always attend school, great attendance, high grades, strong test scores child was not admitted to any of the high schools they had applied to. And these families literally were frantic over where would their child attend high school the following fall. And this happens every year. And I had to deal with it in every different role that I had at the DOE from different perspectives. What is happening with the high school admissions process with the elimination of the District 2 priorities will likely only exacerbate that challenge for families living in District 2 unless they adjust their application behaviors. And so I wanted to speak to you all today to both make sure folks were aware that this happens and talk a little bit about why it happens, but then also help with how to think about how to use your 12 application choices and to make sure you're using all 12 of your application choices in order to minimize the possibility that you or your child will end up in this very difficult situation of not matching to any of the choices on your application and getting assigned to a high school that you may not be interested in attending. So it's going to be very important for districts to families to recognize the changes that are being made, how it affects them, and then to use all of the information available to rank choices in a way that maximizes your likelihood of getting matched to a school that you actually want to attend.
That's helpful. Thank you, Elizabeth. And that's actually a good segue either to Sadie or to Andrew. If you could just tell us a little bit about, so obviously these are enormous changes that will have significant impacts on families, in particular in a pandemic when, parents aren't sort of necessarily in a school on a daily basis able to ask the questions that they might have about the challenges and the nuances of these changes and these processes. So what resources is the Department of Education offering to families and to students and to parents to navigate these different processes? And if you could just delve into sort of, in particular, what the department is doing to ensure that accessibility, right? So all of these processes are sort of happening online. That actually in your efforts to make this a more equitable system, that there are actually proactive measures to help families navigate this.
I'm happy to start. If you want to jump in, go ahead. So I want to acknowledge that making these changes, I think we announced it December 18th before the holidays, was really difficult. It was difficult for families. It's difficult for community members that, as I said, as a comparison, families are normally beginning to apply in September and middle schools in October or at the end of September. And so it's been stressful. And I want to just name that kind of quick time cramp where we're announcing before the holidays and then asking people in a few short weeks to make changes, and that there's a difference in changes can be really stressful and it can feel unfair. And quite frankly, certainly as a person who works internally, also is unfair because part of my charge is to communicate all of these very complex changes to community members. And so I would be doing us all a disservice and be like, it's fine and we're doing it all, right? We're not. We need to go out into communities. And that's why I was so glad that I was invited to talk to Community Board 8 this evening. We're also doing proactive outreach out of my own team. We hold multiple weekly briefing calls for families in Spanish, for immigrant communities, for immigrant advocates, different education advocates, parent leaders who are in sort of formal seats, but also in parent organizations, to make sure that people are getting this information and getting to interact. So not just getting like a one-pager, but we are also, of course, doing the one-pagers. We're doing info sessions, multiple. I realize that I can't chat you guys. I actually wanted to share a bunch of different documents and links. And so hope that I'll be able to share it with Taina and that she'll be able to get that to you as well. And I'm sorry that I can't do that in
actually,
real
Sadie,
time.
you can just put those in the chat to Max, and
Yep.
Max can then give them to everybody.
Got
Yeah,
it.
send them to me directly. Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that right now. So part of this is one, imperfect, right? I would really be not telling you the truth if I was like, no, everybody knows and it's really easy and it's intuitive and it's a quick 1-2, right? It's not, and that does our families and does our system a grave disservice. So I want to name that. I also want to add that we have all of our information available in multiple languages. We are providing it in multiple languages. I see one of my colleagues who is the Manhattan Borough Manager for my team is here. Stephanie, welcome. And so she has been also leading multiple briefing calls across the island and across the city. And I know that the Office of Student Enrollment is doing the same thing. So what I'll do is I will share with you, and I have to again, in service of being honest, just like ask that you turnkey this information. Part of why we do this work is not only to make sure you have the best information possible, but that you, whether you agree or disagree, can make sure that you can also share the best information with your community members.
Great, thank you. And then I'm going to ask two specific questions, either for you or for Andrew, related to a middle school and a high school right here in our district. And then we'll turn it over to Elizabeth for some final thoughts on that specifically, since I know she has knowledge of those processes and those schools, and then would love to open it up. So specifically, let's start with middle school. So we have Wagner Middle School, Robert Wagner Middle School here in Community Board 8. It's a zone school for nearly all of Community Board 8. And as I'm sure you know, has a specialized program. So we're curious, first of all, what will happen to that program, and sort of what you are predicting might be the impact for Wagner if sort of they run out of seats and students in this sort of zoned area, if there aren't enough seats for students in that zoned area. That's the first. I'll ask the second too, so I don't have to, so you don't have to come back to me. The second being about ELRO, Eleanor Roosevelt High School, which is in our district as well. So they've announced their admissions criteria, and they're participating in the DOE Diversity and Admissions Program, which means that a portion of seats, about half, will go to free and reduced lunch students that meet the entrance criteria. And so just if you could answer some sort of fairly specific questions about sort of how widespread these admissions criteria are in high schools around the city, and what would happen if the 50% quota sort of isn't met, sort of like what happens to those seats.
Well, I'm happy to start with at least with my admissions knowledge. So a school like Wagner has a couple of different programs. And so they have their zone, in previous years, they've had their zone program, and then they've had their specialized program, which operate as sort of different admissions pathways into the school. This year, because of the changes that have been made to middle school, Wagner specifically is operating with a single pathway. So there's one program at Wagner that all students can apply to. And that program has a priority first for the students that are zoned, and then to everyone else who's eligible. In terms of what is actually happening inside the school, that honestly is up to the school. And what's actually kind of interesting is it's actually up to the school, even if a school has multiple pathways to gain entrance to the school still is the ultimate decider of what's happening with those kiddos in those classes once they get into that school building. So if I'm a school and I have a zone program and a non-zone program, those students can go to the same classes. They can be programmed in, advanced science or whatever are the classes that school's offering. And that's completely up to the school once students are admitted to those schools. So in terms of what is the future of, certain types of specialized programs within any school across the city, particularly middle schools that are no longer able to look at academic information for their applicants, I think the answer is it's going to be up to the school. Schools won't have the ability to look at that information in order to select students for admissions, but what they can do is they can admit students, and then they can use whatever they'd like to evaluate their own students and decide how to program for those students once they are enrolled at that school. And that's going to be a decision that's made by the school in consultation with their district leadership and with their school communities. I don't know, Sadie, if you had anything. I'm happy to speak a little bit about the diversity and admissions piece at ELRO, if unless anyone else has anything to add.
I think speak to the mechanics of it, and if folks have questions about the why and how, I'm happy to take that.
Sure, of course. As you mentioned, Taina, and as I just said, ELRO has what's called diversity in admissions. And diversity in admissions is a program where a school can say, we would like to either increase the diversity of our student body, or we have a diverse student body, but we're worried it's going to become less diverse and we want to hold on to that. So basically what a diversity in admissions, what being part of that means is that a school will actually prioritize students with certain characteristics for a percentage of their seats. I think, as you mentioned, and I think we have it somewhere. I actually don't have what LRO's specific criteria are, but I think that we have them here, and someone can help pull them up for me. But what's actually happening from a sort of functional standpoint is you can kind of imagine that it almost like splits the seats at that school into two different groups. And so any student that would like to go to that school is completely eligible to apply to, or they're eligible for both of those groups of seats. For one group, a certain a group of students with certain characteristics are prioritized. For the other group, they are not. And just everyone is sort of on even footing for that second group. Now, I want to be really clear that all of this is happening in the back end. If you're a family, you don't need to do anything special to identify your characteristics or apply to one of those groups of seats. It's just one school, one program. You apply just like you would any other school. And all of the prioritization for those for their diversity admissions is done centrally when the match is run. I think one of your questions was, what happens if they don't meet their 50 or whatever there is their percentage for seats, and what happens if they go over? And the answer is, there's nothing in the way that diversity in admissions is set up that that makes anyone ineligible for any seats. So if a school, so for example, if we're talking about students that qualify for free lunch, and say we're talking about 50% of seats, I don't know if that's LRO's, but I'm seeing some nods, so thank you.
Yeah, that was a change. That was this year's change.
Thank you, Sadie.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are not enough applicants who place LRO highly enough to fill those 50% of seats, then anyone else can still fill those seats. That's sort of in the admissions parlance of DOE, that's the difference between an eligibility and a priority. The priority means that they're considered first for those 50% of seats, but everyone else can still be considered if there are not enough applicants to fill that 50%. Now, for the remaining 50%, all students are on equal footing. And so, I'm happy to, if there are more questions about the mechanics of it, I'm happy to go into some real detail, but in short, the answer is the school could have fewer than 50%, or it could have a little more than 50%, depending on what the demographics of their applicant pool ends up looking like this year.
Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. I think I just want to turn it over to Elizabeth just for a few moments before we open it up to further questions. Elizabeth, you're nodding your head over there. I know you having intimate knowledge really of the context here in our community district and our families and our population, sort of hearing that. I would just love to get your reactions, sort of what your predictions are for how this might impact us, and maybe just guiding thoughts for parents and families before we open it.
So, linking to what I said in my introduction, the reason that every year there are a group of families on the Upper East and Upper West Sides who do not match to any school on their list is that effectively families think that because their students' grades are so great or test scores are so great, that of course they will get into one of the, 3 or 4 or 5 most highly selective schools, meaning they have very high screens, but they also have very high numbers of applicants. So these are the schools that are the toughest to get into, or maybe among the toughest to get into, because they both have very high screens and a very large number of applicants. So a very high number of applicants per seat. And then they figure that because of perhaps their District 2 priority, which applied at some of these schools in prior years, but will no longer be there this year, that of course their child will get into one of these schools. And I'm sure some students, I'm talking about it from a parent perspective, but students are making choices here too. And what happens is they don't use the full range of 12 in terms of creating a list of schools they can apply to. And they don't include any schools that perhaps don't have quite as high an academic screen or don't have quite as many applicants per seat. and they get shut out. Effectively, what they've done is they have applied only to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and then get surprised when the student is not accepted at one of the schools on the top of their list. So with the expansion of diversity in admissions, with the elimination of the District 2 priority, that group of highly selective, high number of applications per seat schools are in fact going to get more applicants, because now not only will District 2 students be prioritized, but there will be no priority for District 2 students, so there will be more applicants from other districts in Manhattan. There may be more applicants from boroughs outside of Manhattan, from students from other boroughs, although there is still a Manhattan priority at most of these schools. So you're now not just competing against other District 2 students, you're now competing against all students in all districts of Manhattan. And there are thousands of students who meet the academic criteria. Even when there was a priority for District 2, there were more students in District 2 who met the academic criteria for these highly screened high schools than there were seats. So now there are even more people who are on an equal footing for those schools. What does that mean for families? It means you really need to create a balanced list. And this is the exact same kind of advice that if you have older children, that they have been given when they are applying to college, and it's good practice now for if this is your first child going through this. These schools that are highly screened are effectively reach schools for everyone, because there are so many students and so many applicants who meet the academic criteria. Schools that may not have quite as high academic screens may now be schools that you need to look at for your student, because it is a broader applicant pool who is competing for all of these seats. And kind of like in college, you always try to have reach schools, target schools, and safety schools. You should be looking at some schools where your record clearly jumps well over the bar of whatever the screen is, or maybe there isn't a screen at all, so that you have some schools where you are likely to be admitted. And in DOE admission parlance, these are likely to be schools that use the educational option in their admissions, called EdOpt, and they deliberately try to admit students who are academically at the high end, as well as students who are in the middle, and as well as students who may be less test score or grades achieving than others. So you need to broaden the list so that you're not just applying to the Harvard, Yales, and Princetons, because the competition is much, much greater now at the schools like Eleanor Roosevelt. There are going to be more people applying, and oh, by the way, their students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch will be prioritized for 50% of the seats. The Upper East Side, Community Board 8, most of our students are not eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So they will not be prioritized for those seats. They will still be in the admissions pool. They will still be eligible. They may get in the other 50% of the seats. They may get in the 50% of seats that are reserved if there aren't enough applicants who meet the criteria and who also are eligible for free and reduced lunch. I doubt that will happen. So this has really increased the need for all Upper East Side and frankly all District 2 families to really look at other schools than the usual suspects. And that means looking in other districts. It means looking north in District 4. It means south in District 1. It means across town in District 3. It means really looking at what are your transportation options and what are the schools that you can easily access with whatever your commute time sort of limit is. And that's going to be very different for different people. I have a very low commute time tolerance. Other people have a very high commute time tolerance. And so it really means looking at and researching schools that are outside of the group of usual suspects for the Upper East Side.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is why I'm glad that we had you as a panelist. I think you're giving a little bit of harsh truth and dose of reality. And I think, frankly, it might be tough for families to hear this, but I really appreciate that. And I think it's hopefully welcome insight and advice. And so now I'd like to open it up. I'm sure there are, clearly there are members of the community. We have great attendance if you could raise your virtual hand. So not like this, not your physical hand, because we won't be able to see, but if you could raise your virtual hand if you have a question, and my colleague Max from the Community Board Office will help unmute you so that you can ask your question. I'll jump at once.
Say there can't be no questions here.
There's a hand
We have
from
a hand from Billy, but he is not a member of the public.
We'll go to board members if there are no members of the public that have questions, but really want to make sure we answer questions from members of the public. If there are any, please raise your virtual hand. We will unmute you and you can ask your question.
Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just raising my hand in case there was no one from the public. Yeah. Sorry about that. Thank you. This is really terrific panel. So I'm really glad you all put this together. Maybe a couple questions, for DOE on the decision to make the changes permanent for high school, but not for middle school. I could understand that because, to some degree, particularly, around district, preference issues. I understand why those were treated differently, but there were obviously some core equity concerns driving these decisions. So for example, whether a middle school screen should consider, tardiness, or, those types of factors that really get directly, I think, at a lot of the equity concerns we all share. Why wasn't that type of change made permanent? What is the difference between how we're looking at middle schools versus high schools that's driving, permanence for one and temporariness for the other?
What a great question. I think that, quite frankly, Chancellor Carranza had questions about those specific practices before coronavirus. He was curious about why we were screening middle schoolers around lateness, because tardiness is lateness, behavioral grades, specifically because we know how biases can show up even in our Zoom calls, right? But just in general. And so I think he had a lot of questions. We put together even a big commission to school diversity advisory group who came up with recommendations around middle school screens specifically. But ultimately, I think that there's just been so many profound shifts in all of our lives as individuals and as families and communities that I think the mayor and the chancellor and our DOE leadership sort of came to the table and said, let's just, one bite at a time for this year. I think that there's still really worthy conversations to be had. But I also recognize, I have a kid and I'm doing this and I'm in a home, and it's just all of us are dealing with such a different landscape that I really don't think that they were just trying to make sort of unilateral decisions. But I do think that the spirit that, of what is the fairest and most equitable admissions process for right now did guide the choice. I also think we quite frankly weren't sure about how this year was going to turn out. Were we going to be back in school? Were we not? And as you can see, it's been a little bit of both. And so we'll have to revisit all of these questions for the next round of admissions that our next administration will have to take on as well. And I guess the distinction on high school, I guess, real talk is that when you're late as a 9-year-old to school, it's really, you're 9, you're 10, you're so young. And when it's a little bit older, it's different. However, we did actually change the attendance screen across the board, and we hope to keep that as well.
Great.
So I want to make sure we're respectful of our guest time. So again, if you have a question, sort of now's your chance to raise your hand. Otherwise, I can turn it over to okay, Rami.
Yeah, I'll just go here real quick with one question. So one of the way, just a little bit of background here, one of the ways to apply, or the way to apply to middle school in the DOE is by having a My Student login. And I've heard, this is something in our district that I've heard about, is that there's a lack of I guess, internet access, lack of availability with their codes. So in order to log in to a My Student account, you need a code from your school. And occasionally, and these codes were sent, I don't know how they were sent, but they were sent sometime in December. And sometimes families lose the codes, they're unable to get their code, and they're unable to get in touch with their school to get a new code. The school's parent outreach team, it might be overwhelmed or other factors. How is the DOE addressing issues regarding My Student and just like the inaccessibility that those issues have created with the middle school admissions process?
I think Sadie's muted, and Sadie, I can start, and you can jump in when you become unmuted again. I think thank you, Rami, for that question. I think that My Schools My Schools, I think is what you're referring to, is the name of the website.
Yeah.
It's myschools.nyc, and it is everything that you said. It is relatively new, so the ability to apply online for middle and high school is only 2 years old at this point. So it is a new system, and it is I think we consider it to sort of be the best way for a family to apply to schools. That being said, it does require the internet and internet access in order to use. And we know that there are accessibility problems that exist because of that. I think, I won't pretend that, again, as Sadie sort of said earlier, I won't pretend that we're knocking it out of the park. I think that the department has redeployed a number of resources to try to support families with some of these kinds of things. So we have, for example, in our family welcome centers, which are typically in-person walk-in centers, we've been redeploying staff to have even more capacity to respond to families' emails and phone calls to those centers. We also have P311, which is a parent information hotline that families can call in order to get access to some of those things. And we've been trying to put structures in place to directly support the schools, so that if all of our schools, so that if families are reaching out to their schools to ask them questions, we're able to get the parent coordinators and guidance counselors and other school staff the right information that they can ultimately turn around to their families. It's really hard, and I think one of the solutions to a kind of fair and supportive and equitable admissions process is trying to keep the admissions process as simple as we can possibly make it. And I think that another thing that the department has been trying to do, and specifically the Office of Student Enrollment, is to simplify all of our admissions processes as much as we possibly can, to redesign all of our materials to make it as clear for families as we can possibly make it. And again, to come to spaces like this to answer questions for folks, to host our own forums where families can come and ask questions and get help. I would definitely, if anyone is having trouble, and anyone who's having trouble, the resources, the email addresses and phone numbers that Sadie shared in the chat are definitely the right place to reach out. And we will, we're doing our best to get back to people as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you for that. Just a little bit of just reiterating, a lot of the resources that our panel talked about today are in the chat, including a few different things, including the phone number for the Office of Student Enrollment, My Student, just some other links and websites. as well as some other information about things that we're not discussing today, like elementary schools and 3K. So back to you.
And I would like to share one additional resource if we have a second. And can I share my screen? Can you give me that ability?
I believe you can.
You can now.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is truly what I'm going to share is truly my favorite thing that I think I've ever seen the DOE do. And I think it is very underused and unknown. This is called the School Performance Dashboard, and it is a way of assessing how well do schools really serve and move their students relative to other schools. So I'm going to use Eleanor Roosevelt here as an example. You type in the name of a school. It's 2019, 2020. It gives you, so this is a slightly new version because it's newer data, but it gives you a sense of all of the data that exists for schools. Now, I wish we could go back to the 2018, 2019 version. There is this section right here in the center is a wonderful 2x2 matrix. It basically says, for similar students, how do these schools perform relative to expectations for these students? So a high performance school and a high school is a high graduation rate. A low performance here is a low graduation rate. A high impact is a higher percentage of the kids graduate than you might have expected based on their incoming academic achievements and demographics. A low impact school is one that is underperforming, where the kids are not doing as well as you would expect them to. And if we can, at some point, look for a version of that is 2018, 2019, you'll see that there are a whole bunch of dots in this quadrant. And then there are bunches of dots in the other quadrants as well. So you as a parent or you as a student are really looking for, I want a school that is performing well with the students it has, meaning above this bar here. And then obviously, depending on your interests and how well you have done relative to screen schools, you're going to be looking for a school that is graduating as many students as possible and has higher percentage as possible. And this dashboard can really help you find, you know, after I've looked at the Stuyvesants and the Eleanor Roosevelts, who, by the way, all perform kind of right around here. They're high performing, but they're basically meeting the what is expected of that group of students based on their incoming characteristics. You would expect those students to all graduate. There are great schools that may be a little bit lower on this characteristic, but are much higher on this characteristic. And those are schools that are really serving students well and graduating students at a higher rate than you might have expected based on their incoming levels of preparation and their demographics. Because we know that there are demographic characteristics that correlate with likely high school graduation. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I encourage families, as we have to look for a greater range of schools, I encourage families to use this. And it just occurred to me, I can just change this. And here you go. I changed this to last year's data, and I'm now only looking at Manhattan schools. And you can see, here's Eleanor Roosevelt. It's very high performing, but kind of you expect the kids to do well. Well, these schools up here might in fact be slightly lower graduation rate. Park East High School is a great example here. Park East High School is a great high school. It is in District 4. It is easily accessible from Community Board 8. And it graduates a slightly lower percentage of kids than Eleanor Roosevelt, But look at what it is here. It is graduating students who would not have been expected to graduate high school. So this is a really powerful school in that it's really helping kids whose incoming preparation or demographics might not have predicted that they would achieve at such a high academic level and graduate high school, but Park East High School is hitting it out of the ballpark. And so this is a very powerful tool to help identify what are some of the other schools you might want to look at in your high school applications.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and share that link in the chat as well, Max. I think this is a really useful tool. So unless there are other questions from the public, I just want to, again, thank you, Sadie. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Elizabeth. This was an incredibly informative conversation. We really appreciate you taking the time, especially at night. I know you have families and responsibilities, so and you've given us more than plenty of time. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Peter. We have a few other items on the agenda, but thank you, Sadie. Thank you, Andrew. Can't thank you enough, and really appreciate everything, Elizabeth, as well.
Taina, if other questions come up from the board that they would like answered, or if you ever want to have us back to talk about some fun stuff, District 2 is a NICIP grant recipient from the state, and you guys are receiving about $2.5 million for the next 3 years, not just CB8, District 2,
Right.
which is much bigger, which you know, and they'll be doing a lot of engagement around equity, excellence, what school diversity and integration might look like in this district. And those are intended to be community-driven processes, ones that Andy and I hold very near and dear to our hearts. So would love to come back any old time, but really appreciate your civic engagement and are available.
Thank you so much, Sadie. Thank you, Andrew. Have a great evening, guys. Thank you.
Be well.
I'll turn it over to Peter to go through the next items on the agenda.
Go ahead, Peter.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I really want to thank you all for that presentation. It's clearly that it's an arena where one needs a little bit of help in navigating the system, and so Sadie and Elizabeth, and I don't have the other.
Andrew.
Andrew, thank you all for that assistance. We also do have a couple of areas of new business, and I'm actually really pleased to be putting these out, basically for initial discussion, but potentially if there's interest among the community board members, we could come up with a resolution in each area to support the initiative. The first is
wait, Peter, do you want me to go with real fast so I don't take up as much as their time with universal literacy?
Well, I was going to, in effect, combine them. Let me propose this, and I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can do whatever feels right. But essentially, one initiative in our neighborhood that's been receiving a fair amount of attention lately is the we call it dual language. Is that the right phrase? Dual language initiative. And we have Stefan Lautner here, who's going to help us understand that. And in addition, in the course of discussing that with Stefan, it appears we may want to think of that to some degree related to our universal literacy initiative. So that's the first area. And the second is a conversation around what's called diversify our narrative, which is to say that the materials in the curriculum be defined in such a way it's not all Dick, Jane, and Spot, to coin a phrase from like 50 years ago. I'm not even sure if they're still active in primary school literature, but that the materials reflect the diversity of our community in terms of ethnicity, race, gender, and so on. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Rami. Please pick it up, and thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So right before we get to these new businesses, real fast, so a few of us, particular members of this committee, but also other CB8 members, have been working on discussing a universal literacy initiative in our district. It's very much a discussion. It's very much informal at the moment. and we are looking for interest, anyone who's interested in getting involved with this initiative on universal literacy, which is, if you don't know what universal literacy is, it's basically the idea that everyone be reading, every student in our, basically our elementary school system, be able to read on grade level by 3rd to 5th grade. And if you want to learn more about that, don't hesitate to reach out to Peter, myself, Taina, or the district office, and we can definitely have a discussion with you about this. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stefan to discuss the dual language initiative that he has been working on with his French program. So Stefan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Rami. Thank you, Peter, also. Good evening to everyone from the CB8. Just wanted to introduce myself. I have also, I think, on the call with me right now, probably about 10 or 15 members of the French Dual Language Initiative that we have here on the Upper East Side. Just a quick background on the initiative. Obviously we say French Dual Language Initiative, but really what I want to highlight out of it is, it is an effort to promote dual language initiatives across New York City, not just French, to highlight why French. Myself, my heritage language is French, so that's sort of where it started. The initiative is really 150 families across the neighborhood, representing people coming from 30 different heritage nationalities. French, the Francophone language, the Francophone world is an official language, a primary language in 29 countries, a language that is used as a working language in just shy of 84 countries around the world, and really used by 275 million people globally. So, that's why this has been part of the initiative. But again, it's open to really all languages. What we're really trying to do is develop a pilot school in Community School District 2, which is all of the Upper East Side, all the way down to Lower Manhattan. By numbers, I know we have members of the DOE here, but that Community School District 2 is the largest community school district in New York City in terms of number of students. It's also, unfortunately, the poorest in terms of number of dual language schools that exist in the district. There's 2 dual language schools in the district versus, I believe, 13 on the Upper West Side. So a little bit unfortunate to see. And so we're really looking for support on that to go along with the concept of literacy. And this is something that Peter and I have discussed at length. For universal literacy, I think it starts at an early age, and it's something that I don't think we have much. Unfortunately, in this country, it's if a child is tested in terms of what their literacy looks like in English, but it's not their primary language, and it's the language that they only speak at school, but at home they're speaking another language. It impacts their literacy. It impacts their cultural literacy, and as well as just their reading proficiency. So I think that by being able to reach out to students, being able to reach out into a community in a child's heritage language, really will bring up a lot of positive effects for a community, to be able to engage those students appropriately. So, I'll leave it there. I think myself and members of my community are on. I think Nadia Levy probably has her hand up. She's one of the 10 that are in the crowd. I think she had a couple words that she wanted to add as to what I've been saying, and obviously we're all here, all 10 plus of us of the 150 are on the call, and so we're happy to engage with any questions from the community board.
So Max, if you want to unmute Nadia.
You did.
Okay, thank you. And then board members, I'm going to ask that you hold questions till after they speak.
Thank you. So I wanted to mention that I think that, well, first of all, we successfully started a pre-K, but we were looking to continue and do a K through 5 at one of the schools in the neighborhood. you know, having a daughter at the program, I feel that one of the beautiful things about this program is in fact that, you know, when you hear French, you might think France, but in fact, it's very, very diverse community, very multicultural, and all the Francophone countries are really represented in, you know, in the initiative and in the school. But to play off what Andrew was actually saying about, you know, pulling in from other districts, that was actually always our intention with this program, because so the District 2 does need more dual language programs, but specifically the Upper East Side seems to be where the Francophone heritage language is centered. There's a lot of people who are Francophone in District 4. There's also a lot of Francophone population in District 1 and throughout District 2. So really, we were always envisioning sort of pulling Francophone populations from the whole area. And in fact, many active members in our group come from the neighboring districts. And I really think that that would allow us to sort of play on the multiculturalism that comes along with the French language. And I think it would effectively, it's a great way to, you know, diversify maybe a school on the Upper East Side, in addition to helping these children acquire, you know, learn in 2 languages, learn in their heritage language. It'll help with literacy, and it will also probably help fill some empty seats that might have come about because, you know, all the attrition from COVID. But anyway, so I just wanted to say that, because we always had that thought of screening by, you know, certain characteristics like being Francophone over being in zone. And that sort of plays upon what I think Andrew brought up earlier.
Thank you for that. I see Flavia has her hand up. I don't know if she wants to speak.
Hello. Hi, I'm Flavia. I'm also from the same group, the 2 people who spoke before me. I am a naturalized French citizen, but I was born in Brazil, and I'm also American. My son has all these nationalities, and he speaks all these 3 languages. He's 5 years old right now, and I'm from District 1. So I'm one of the people who tried very hard to get into this program, the pre-K, and I didn't get in, and probably because I'm in District 1. There were just too many kids for a few spots. So I'm very hurt because my son basically got, you know, besides the COVID issue, and he lost a whole year of not having French education because I paid thousands and thousands of dollars that, I mean, I just scraped here and there to give him the French education when he was 3 years old, 4 years old, full pause. So I'm here, single mom, working full time, trying to teach him English, Portuguese, and French, so he doesn't lose any of the languages, right? Because I became a teacher basically during the pandemic. So he's going to a school who I'm not happy with in District 1, even though it seems to be a school that a lot of people want to go to. But he's there because I didn't want to pay thousands of dollars. But so I'm kind of heartbroken that it didn't work out yet for us to have the K program, because I just don't have $30,000 or $50,000 to pay for his French education. And how is he going to talk to his family, right? But I can say, because 50% of his family speak French, the other 50 speaks Portuguese, and only 2 people out of everybody speaks any English, because it's just me, New York City. But I want to say that as a personal experience, that my son, speaking the 3 languages, he developed in all other areas. He's only 5 years old, but you can already see the difference. So if kids have this edge that in Europe a lot of kids have, it would change our country, because it's unbelievable how we have so few dual language programs when there's so many people trying, and there are more kids in spots. And, you know, we stuck around through this pandemic. Here we are. And if any French program accepts my son, you will happily commute. I mean, I would wish I didn't have to commute much, but I can definitely commute from District 1 to District 2. So yeah, it's a great initiative, and I think we're live examples, just these people who are speaking, of children being bilingual and developing in all other areas and not just languages.
Thank you, Flavia. I see Joyce has her hand up. Max.
Sure. Yeah, I asked Joyce to unmute. Joyce, you have to look for a pop-up to unmute. Oh,
Hi, okay, I got Joyce is back. Do you want to go first, Joyce, or I can speak? I guess I'll speak quickly. The other people you've heard from so far are Francophone members of this dual language community. My daughter is in the UPK program this year. I'm from an English speaking household. I speak some French, but we are not a Francophone household. And it has done incredible things just for her language acquisition. And it's amazing seeing her pick up at this age when they're so able to pick up new languages. And it seems like a huge shame just to bring in this group of pre-K kids, give them a dual language education for a year. And that's going to happen next year too. They're enrolling in the pre-K program next year, and then just leave it. And all the heritage speakers don't have any continuation of services. And the lucky families who, you know, whose kids got to start learning a second language, which is just so rare in the United States, you know, all are also the poorer for it. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for that. Joyce, if you're unmuted, you can go ahead. Joyce, I think you're muted.
I think she just muted herself. Joyce, try.
Hi, I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, sorry about that earlier. I just wanted to echo what Nadia and Catherine had said. My daughter is in the dual language French pre-K. My husband, you know, is French. My children grew up speaking, you know, French, Chinese, English, and you know, but French is truly a heritage language for our family. We're very close, you know, to my husband's family, and it's really a shame that we cannot continue these services for my daughter and the children in her class. My daughter has thrived learning, you know, these, you know, learning 3 languages. I really think learning French in a way has helped, I think, keep her brain elastic and allow her to learn and be open to learning other languages such as, you know, Chinese and English. So having the French is really important, and she's able to make connections with English, which is actually, you know, probably one of her developing languages. So, and I think that's what she needs. That it would be a shame to put her in an all English speaking school. I feel like that may be a detriment to her, you know, not being able to absorb, you know, all the languages that she can now at, you know, at the tender age of 4 and 5. So, you know, I would strongly urge, you know, everyone to consider that, you know, keeping French and dual language programming really does increase literacy in our children, especially at this young age. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Joyce. If there is no members of the public, if there are no other members of the public that want to speak on this issue, I'm going to turn to board members. Vanessa, if you'd like to unmute her. Vanessa, I think.
Thanks. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks so much. And thank you to those who came to talk to us tonight about this issue, because I know it's been something that's been in the news and things I've heard about. So I just wanted to ask, I wanted to first share that, you know, when I heard about this program being not discontinued, but not extended past pre-K, I felt it was really disturbing that, at least from what I've read and heard about, it sounds like this group of active, involved parents and stakeholders who are, you know, really interested in education in our community, sort of did all the right things, put all the pieces together and navigated all the bureaucracy that is quite difficult, as we all know, as we heard from the last presentation, to create, you know, a really awesome, sounds like program. So I guess I just wanted to clarify what exactly has happened. And, you know, I hope that, and kind of where we are now, and how the community board can step in here and hopefully, you know, see if there are options still on the table for these families. I'll share what I've heard or what I've read in the news was that, well, one, I read that the program itself was actually more diverse than the host school. So I thought that that was something I wanted to clarify if that was true, given that we just heard about, you know, the DOE's initiatives for diversity. And then the second question again was sort of like, if someone from the community can clarify what happened, because what I read was that the program wasn't expanded to K and beyond because they were holding seats for those who have fled the city for COVID, which seems like it didn't make any sense. So I'd love to hear if there's more information that can be clarified on this program and sort of how we can try to help. Thanks.
So Stefan or Nadia, I see Nadia has her hand up, but if Stefan wants to jump in, Max, you can unmute either of them.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for saying that. And this program does mean a lot to a lot of us. We have, you know, 150 plus families in our initiative. And to answer your question directly, yes. Right now, as it stands, the program has children from North Africa, West Africa, Europe. I'm actually from Quebec, but I'm also Middle Eastern and Indian. There's other Middle Eastern families. There's even Spanish speaking families and Anglophone families like Catherine mentioned that sometimes just have an interest in dual language education. But it is at right now more diverse than the host school that was proposed. But also if we do sort of allow to not sort of go by zoning as much, it would even stand to be 10 times more diverse. It's a very successful program. What went wrong, in my opinion, is a breakdown in communication, I think, a change in superintendent in our district. And so things were sort of on the track of working out. And then, you know, whenever there's a change, and whenever there's a change, things sometimes, I guess, fall through the cracks. But also, there were some arguments given to us for why they're not letting this happen. And it just seemed like they were not really trying. So the main reasons that they gave us were number one, that though there are enough seats right now at that school and at a lot of other schools in the area, that people might come back to the city. So essentially, yes, they were saying, we need to hold seats because people might come back and then there's going to be overcrowding or whatever, which I'm sorry, but if you stuck it out and stayed in the city or didn't have the option to go to your second home and then come back is a little infuriating. But anyhow, the other thing is they mentioned that there's a lack of teachers. However, we have identified teachers. We really have. We've been working hard all year to do that. And so we do have teachers lined up for this. Another reason they gave us is that there isn't a need. I would disagree. These are pre-K students and they haven't, they haven't really taken the home survey. So they don't even know how many of them are in need of French education. But not only that, a lot of them, even the ones that speak English, some of them have, their primary language is French. And as we've mentioned, that's important for literacy, and it's important for preservation of your culture and of your homeland, your heritage. So there was that. So there definitely is a need. There's plenty of people, and as I mentioned, from throughout our district, there's a large Francophone contingent, but District 4 and District 1 as well. So the East Side just basically needs this particular heritage language is just common on the East Side. And then the last thing that they mentioned was, I believe, was so the space, the teachers, the need, and maybe Stefan remembers the fourth point. But in order to help us, to circle back to your last question, funding, that's right, funding. And fair student funding does follow these students. The French teachers do not make any extra money. There's a little bit of some resources that are needed when you start a French program, but by no means is this a deal breaker. The funding would just be for books and some teacher development. And there actually are government grants available from multiple Francophone countries that we've already applied to and received for the pre-K. So if you ask the pre-K, there was no extra funds really. I mean, we provided them with the funds with all this grant money from the various Francophone governments. What we wanted to do was explain that to them when they gave us those reasons, but it was a one-way conversation. So in order to help us, what we would like to do is have a proper two-way conversation where they're telling us why they aren't giving this program to us, and we're telling them, hey, but we looked into that, and we looked into that, and we looked into that, and we looked into that. So can you, what is your response to that? I don't understand. And because it really feels like those are, they're reasons, but it feels like they weren't really thinking it through. That's just what it feels like. It's that they didn't really put in the effort.
Oh, Rami, let me jump in just briefly. I think Elizabeth wants to speak, and I think Stefan may want to speak again. And if there's an appetite in the community board members, I would be more than willing and interested in entertaining a resolution supporting this program and universal literacy for us to present here, vote on, and then present at the community board meeting in the coming weeks.
Okay, so let's unmute Stefan just in case he has anything to add to Nadia's response to that. And then we'll go to Billy, Elizabeth, and then Alita. And then we'll take Peter's motion. So let's unmute Stefan.
And I just want to say, I'm a little sensitive to the time. If people are willing, I would like to hear these questions, but let's try to be sensitive to the time, because we also want to hear from Justin Greenberg about the diversifier narrative. So go ahead, Rami. Thank you.
Stefan.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rami. I'll keep it brief because I think Nadia hit on absolutely every key point that we needed to hit with regards to what went wrong and the diversity of the program. I think I just wanted to make two quick additional comments on top of what those that she made. When Deputy Chancellor Josh Wallach, who's in charge of early childhood education and enrollment at the DOE, when he approved the creation of the program in March, I had gotten a call from a good partner of ours, Councilmember Ben Kalos. And in that call, I was told that there were 36 seats that were being made available. The UPK, again, was created relatively late in the pre-K application cycle. I mean, within, call it, less than a week left to go in that enrollment cycle. What I want to highlight out of that, though, is that even in that short amount of time, we had 110 requests for the seats that were being open for those 36 seats. So we had 3 times more demand versus the seats that were actually made available, and that demand was coming from throughout Manhattan. So, when Nadia mentions that the DOE was unable to see a need for, or demand for a program like this in the neighborhood, that was sort of one of the main points of contention that we had. And, when you sort of think broader and you think of education, one of the key DOE points is culturally responsive sustaining education, and being able to sustain a language, being able to sustain heritage that goes along with a person's culture. It's something that they talk a lot about, but seeing the DOE decide not to pursue this program in 2K and thereafter was extraordinarily disappointing, for us. So I'll leave it there because obviously there are other things on the agenda. So I mean, Nadia and I and the rest of our team here, we could go on for a while talking about this, but I'll leave it there. We are around. You can reach out to us. You can find us on any of the social media, on Twitter or anything like that. Just if anyone's looking for me, I'm at JS Lautner on Twitter, and I'm happy to take any message from anyone now or afterwards.
Thank you, Stefan. Billy, do you still want to speak or? Okay.
In the interest of time, I'll pass. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Billy. Elizabeth?
To all of the families who have lobbied so hard for this French dual language program, I feel your pain. And it has long been for me one of, I think, the shames of District 2 that it has had such a paucity of dual language programs. And it is certainly the one thing that might have gotten me to send my children to a school other than their zoned elementary school would have been a dual language elementary school program. I'd like to just share with you, and I'm happy to meet with you offline because there's probably more than we have time for, sort of what the DOE's perspective likely is and things that they may not be saying to you. The first is that dual language within the DOE is very much tied to the teaching of English to non-English speaking children. So even though there are families for whom French is a heritage language and it may be a second language in the home, what I haven't heard you all say is we have a lot of kids for whom French is the single and only language that they are speaking when they arrive in kindergarten. And that is what dual language as a program exists to work with. And it's more of a specific educational construct than I think any of us would like for it to be. And so I think that is part of the trap that this program is getting caught in. Frankly, the DOE has so much to do to fix all of its issues and needs for the students who literally do not speak another language coming into kindergarten. That this is, because we're talking about children who probably are speaking 2 or even 3 languages, they're viewing it from a different lens. The seats question, what I would come back to them with is, A, there should be new capacity being built on the Upper East Side, and schools can be rezoned. The real reason that there are so few school choices in the Upper East Side is because we frankly fill every seat in all of the zone schools on the Upper East Side with local students. The only new non-zoned program that's been put in place in the past 20 years has been the Gifted and Talented program at PS 198. That was the only, and I'm not talking about PS 77 right now, the only new choice program was the Gifted and Talented program at PS 198, and that was the only school on the Upper East Side that has ever had space for out-of-zone students. But there should be new capacity being built. This is an opportunity with COVID and with all of the shifts of who may or may not be returning. The Upper East Side was rezoned within the past decade. I know I was responsible for it. It was actually one of the less contentious rezonings that I ever did, which is shocking given where it was. But I knew the community, and the community really worked together collectively to make the rezoning work. So that is part of the story that you're going to need to have to tell. And yeah, they should be all over this like white on rice. It is so consistent with all of the chancellor's messages, and particularly for all of the Francophone immigrant families throughout Manhattan, this should be a no-brainer. So I feel your pain, and I'm happy to help offline.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And then Lita.
Oh, and are you all connected with the group on the Upper West Side that created the French dual language program there? Okay, yeah, they're all good buddies.
Aaliyah, if we can mute her.
Thank you. And maybe I missed this and I apologize, but the idea of dual language or extra language learning starting at a very young age, I think is really important for a place of Americans in the world. I have felt the lack of any foreign language until middle school because I'm not good at languages and I can't really speak a second language very well. Starting at a young age for everyone, not just people for whom it's a heritage language, should be paramount in the city's education system, because it feels weird to be, every other country speaks English as a second language and we speak nothing, or nothing is required. So I would support a foreign language option starting in pre-K or kindergarten for anyone who wants that opportunity. And again, if I miss that and I'm making a fool of myself, well, so be it, and I apologize, but thank you.
Thank you, Alita. So Peter called the question. Do we have a second from board members?
I'll second.
Thank you, Taina, Billy as well, Vanessa, Ed. Okay, so the next, since we don't have a resolution written, I'll just go over what it would entail. So that would include support for Stefan's and his group's dual language program, from not only extending from pre-K all the way through 5th grade. We're supporting that. We're also supporting universal literacy. And we are also supporting just dual language as a whole, right, Peter?
That's fine. I think it works.
Okay. So board members will send you a finalized resolution, but we'll vote now, right, Peter?
Yes.
So we all know how voting goes. If you're abstaining, voting no, not voting for cause, raise your hand.
I think Vanessa has a question, and that's not a
vote. Okay. Vanessa, go ahead.
Sorry, I guess I can't make an amendment to what you suggested.
Oh, of course.
Am I allowed to?
Yeah, what's your proposed amendment? Go ahead.
So my proposed amendment is just that we're specific about like the support of this program, and to Nadia's point, like helping this group get some answers as to why, or helping this group continue the dialogue as to why it wasn't extended and if there are any other options. I just don't want it to be sort of like general support of this, you know what I mean? If there's any space for us to help this particular group right now, I'd love to be able to like, you know, put that in there.
I totally accept that. I take it as an expression that we, as part of the motion, we support the engagement with DOE to get answers to our expressed interests and concerns.
I love the way you put that.
Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. So we're going to vote. If you raise your hand if you have any objections, no votes, not vote for cause, or abstaining. And Peter, I think the procedure here is that do I have to read everyone who's a board member here?
No, I've got a list of names, and frankly, I don't see any people disagreeing. So
Will says we do have to read all the names into the video.
Okay, I'll read the names into the video. We have Peter, we have Taina, we have Alita, we have Billy, we have Ed, we have Elizabeth, we have Gail, we have Jack, we have Marco, we have Rebecca, and we have Vanessa. And I guess myself as a public member, I don't know how that works.
Yes.
But,
Yes, Rami.
okay. So with that, thank you, Stefan, and your group, and everyone who spoke today on this issue. We will be sending over minutes as well as a finalized motion to you guys shortly, probably next few days. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin Greenberg, who will be discussing diversifying our narrative, a DOE initiative. So Max, if you can unmute Justin.
And thank you, Justin, for coming and bringing this initiative to our attention. I really appreciate that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So yeah, thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. Just a quick introduction about myself, and just letting you know that my partner, her name's Caitlin. She's also going to be talking, if that's okay. So I'm Justin Greenberg, and I'm a sophomore at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. And if you can unmute Caitlin.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm also a sophomore at LRO. And Justin and I have just prepared a quick summary of our campaign and what we would like to focus on in the future.
Yeah, awesome. So recently I became the head of District 2 chapter for a campaign known as Diversify Our Narrative, or also DAWN. So the campaign aims to change high school curriculums to include more anti-racist and diverse texts. So, in light of recent events in where there's been multiple instances of police brutality against the Black community, we wanted to bring attention to the problem of anti-Blackness in America, and specifically as students, how we can fight to be anti-racist and encourage a productive dialogue on race and identity among our student bodies. Also, how can we represent the diverse community we have in District 2 and all around the city? So Diversify Our Narrative aims to solve these problems by, mandating that there's be at least one book by a person of color or about a person of color's experience in every English or literature class.
Diversify Our Narrative also has chapters across the US where school communities will promote a certain petition for our campaign. When these petitions reach a certain amount of signatures, the chapters are able to discuss changing the school curriculum to include more POC literature with their school boards. Our petition to include this literature in District 2 schools received only about 250 signatures from current high school students, parents, and alumni. However, we realized that because the New York City public school system is very different and more complicated with assigned districts, we wanted to discuss the possibility of the DAWN campaign in New York City schools. This may be expanding our mission to include all New York City public high schools through drafting a resolution or a meeting with the DOE, or just focusing our efforts specifically on District 2 schools.
Yeah, so just to reiterate Caitlin's point, the Diversify Our Narrative staff, they don't really know how school boards or districts are, run in the city. So we're basically here just to talk with you all and decide the best ways to incorporate more POC literature in New York City high school curriculum. But that's pretty much it. We would love to hear any advice, ideas, feedback, or questions that any of you guys have. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Well, I hope there'll be other questions. I'm going to jump in one at the outset, which is there any particular focus in terms of, primary, middle school, high school? Is it all the above? How do you think about that?
I think for now, it's mostly in high school curriculum because it's ran by high schoolers around the nation. But obviously, it would be great if we can expand the POC literature to all aspects of education, because I recently had my first experience that just this summer. I've never read a book by a person of color before, which I thought was crazy. So I would love definitely, maybe in the future to have it expand through all aspects. But I think for now it's mostly high school based.
Got it.
Any members of the public have questions on this issue? Seeing no members of the public, any board members have questions?
I'd like to quickly invite Caitlin to make any additional comments that she may have about sort of her
Yeah.
interest in where it comes from.
So basically, a couple of years ago, I actually passed a resolution with my friends about mental health in New York City public schools. And after hearing the Diversify Our Narrative proposal from Justin, I wanted to kind of bring this here because I feel like it does have the potential to reach a lot of New York City public high schools, especially because the literature that we read as high schoolers is not very diverse at all. And we learn a lot about white history in our history classes as well. And I feel that it's important to expand that just because life is diverse, you know? So I think that expanding this to include all New York City high schools would actually be a very good idea because all people should experience this, I mean, in general. And so that's why, I mean, New York City is incredibly diverse as well, so.
So Caitlin, a question about that. Would you like a resolution from us tonight supporting, I guess the proper term is DAWN, or is it just your initiative?
It's DAWN, yeah, Diversify Our Narrative, yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, I mean, Justin, you can.
Yeah, totally. We don't have a resolution drafted because, again, we haven't really gotten any guidance from the campaign, so we just came here. Oh yeah, sorry, Peter.
Let me propose a resolution that Community Board 8 supports and endorses the Diversify Our Narrative initiative in our district and throughout the city.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Ed, would you like to be unmuted? I see you are waving your hand.
Sorry, I couldn't find my raise your hand icon. All I could find was the clapping and the thumb up. I had a really quick question to our high school folks. Are you telling me that in your entire time in the New York City school system, you haven't read Native Son by Richard Wright?
No.
Are you kidding? I mean, I'm not done an indictment of you, but I mean, you haven't read Richard Wright? You haven't read Native Son? I mean, my goodness, I'm dating myself, but I mean, it's a classic written in 1940. Whatever. I'm just shocked by that. I'm just absolutely, I'm stunned. I'm stunned that New York City would not have, what grade level are you all?
We're sophomores.
Yeah, sophomores.
Sophomores. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's shocking to me. Shocking.
We have Rebecca Dangor with her hand up.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hey, could you guys send some links to Max to put in the chat so we can learn more about this after?
Yeah, totally. I have the link to the actual Google form that they push a lot to sign out, and it has a lot of information. I also have the Google Docs to, they gave a list of provided books that they recommend to implement into curriculums. And I thought it was a really good way to see like what actually they're trying to push and what could actually be included. So
could you maybe mention just a couple of the books? I'm just curious.
No, yeah. So let me see.
We can also put the link to the Instagram account too in the chat, which has all the information about it. But yeah, Justin.
Yeah, so some books are How to Be Anti-Racist, Why Are All Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, Between the World and Me, Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, I'm Malala, of course, The Blacks.
How about any books of works of fiction?
Any works? Yeah, let me check. They have a list of genre.
Like I'm thinking maybe Invisible Man, Beloved.
Oh yeah, they do have Beloved. Also The Hate You Give, The House on Mango Street, Parachutes, Children of Blood and Bone, and they have an entire list. I'll totally send it over.
Okay, just because personally I think that the fiction is equally important.
Yes, no, totally agree. And I mean, now looking at it at Elro over this summer, it was the first time we read both The Hate You Give and I'm Malala, and just even though The Hate You Give, like you said, it's fiction, it still leaves a very strong message and impact. Yeah, I'll definitely send that over.
Okay.
Justin and Caitlin, do you guys have is there a website or just an overall, not just a Google Docs?
Yeah, I can pull out the website right here.
Okay, thank you. And if you could just DM them in the chat to Max, and he'll be sure to send that over to us. We'll put it, if you send that to him now, he could put it in the chat now, so it's in the record now. But then we'll also make sure it's in the minutes after the meeting. So I see Billy has his hand up. If we could unmute him.
Thank you, Justin and Caitlin, for the presentation. That was really important and informative. I share Ed's shock about, you're not being assigned officers of color, throughout your many years in the school system. So I guess I was going to tee up to the other committee members. Is there a point at which we, have a separate meeting, or maybe in conjunction with the Social Justice Committee, talk about what's going on, there. I mean, to paraphrase a recently departed elected figure, I think we need a complete and immediate halt to school curricula until we can figure out what the hell is going on. And seriously, like, that is shocking to me. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising, but it is shocking. So, whether it's anti-racist curricula explicitly, whether it's as simple as making sure that, authors of color are being assigned in our, not just high schools or middle schools, elementary schools. I think that's a really important thing that for us to look into as a committee, and possibly with some other committees on the board.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, Ed, your reaction was the exact same that my parents gave when I told them about it. And they mentioned a list of books, and it's like, you haven't read them, and they like freaked out. So I think it's a really important campaign, and I'm very happy to be part of it.
This year also, what I've noticed at Elro specifically, we are reading more literature by people of color. Like, we did read Invisible Man this past month. And then over the summer, we did read The Hate U Give and I, Malala. But I mean, that is also just a change this year too. And I don't know if that's happening in other public schools as well.
Billy, that motion, I guess, is noted. And we'll definitely, Peter, Taina, and I will definitely bring that up.
Absolutely. I think I, among other things, I endorse the idea of having a joint session with the Social Justice Committee focused on this issue in relation to education and the entire city system. So thank you for that, Justin. Good suggestion.
So Peter called the question on a resolution. Oh, Alita has her hand up, and then we'll move on. Alita?
I don't know if Jack wanted to make a comment. Jack Zimmerman, go ahead, Alita.
I'll be really quick. I'd like to know when the curriculum changed, because I grew up in the Bronx, and when I was in high school, we read books by Black authors, Native American authors, Chinese people. We read a huge diverse set of fiction. I don't remember history so much, but I still have the books I read in high school. So I'd like to know what happened and when things changed so that the curriculum became less diverse and less interesting. That's all. Thank you.
I agree. I don't know specifically when, but all that I can tell you is, like, just raising their point, all these books by people of color and about their experience in America and what they go through on the daily. I haven't been exposed to that since this year, in the past year, which it's horrifying, as Billy and Ed has mentioned. So I don't know when exactly it changed, but all I know is that it did change, and I would like to put it back to the way it once was.
Okay. Are there any other comments? I wasn't sure.
Yes, I see Ed has his hand up again.
Go ahead, please. And Jack, I keep on coming back to you. I'm not sure if you wanted to comment. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ed.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick question. I mean, and again, not to delve into this curriculum question, but it is, just in terms of general understanding of human beings. I'm just curious in terms of what we're reading, what you all are reading currently. I mean, you haven't read Native Son. I mean, that's whatever, that's fine. But I mean, have you read something? I guess what I'm driving at is, have you read anything to put things in perspective, like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair? I mean, I know we don't have these sweatshops anymore and these things, but I don't know, you can just say I'm freaking middle-aged because of my gray hair, and that's fine. But my point is that it's a funny thing, as you get older, you realize that history is important and that it's really not that long ago. I'm sorry to say, but in order to know where we're going, we need to know where we've been. And I'm just curious as to why some of these books and things, of the way things were and how we have progressed, and the progress that we make and the missteps and corrections along the way, I'm just kind of surprised by that, because so much of what we do, at least in my world, in my law practice, dealing with elected types and election law and those issues, we just seem to have lost some kind of perspective, and people seem to forget that some of the ideas that are thrown out there by folks, they seem to have thought that they think of all these phrases all on their own. And say, for instance, one that I heard tossed around, make America great again. Well, you know, I happened to catch on the Reagan documentary on HBO, there's a certain 70-year-old guy standing out there at Lady Liberty in 1980 going, let's make America great again. And I was like, gee, I thought only one guy came up with that idea. And my point for that is, it just, again, back to the over making the point, it's just more historical perspective of some of these books, not necessarily white or black authors or Native American, all of them, but just more historical perspectives, either of fiction or reality, of what we went through in the 20th century to shape how we deal with these issues in the 21st century. Because last time I checked, we went to war in 1861 to get rid of slavery once and for all. And yet 1964, I mean, when I was in college, in 1985, I drove down Route 1 in Virginia, from Fredericksburg to Ashland, Virginia, and I drove by a gas station from the 30s that was closed down, and what I saw was the word colored under the Coca-Cola sign. I'd never seen it in my life. It was faded, but it just struck me like a chill to see it. It was the first time I ever saw such a thing. And I guess my point is, I guess I would just like to see more history, more getting out there, more involvement in that. And somehow it gets lost in all of it. Anyway, sorry, I've gone on too long and the point's lost, but I just felt like I wanted to say that so that we have something out there on these kinds of things. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. Caitlin or Justin, you can briefly respond to that, but I see Jesse Moskowitz from the 67th Street Young Adult Library. I butchered that a little bit, but we get the point. As we are youth education and libraries, I think it's only fitting. So Justin or Caitlin, you could respond to Ed, and then we'll go to Jesse.
Yeah, I just want to quickly, Ed, like I totally agree. Like hearing it now, putting it in perspective, it's like crazy to think that I haven't or I know Caitlin and we haven't read this as teenagers, all these stories. So I totally agree. And I think that it's a very important initiative that, I would love to get started and see its effects. Yeah. But yeah.
Max, if we can unmute Jesse.
Go ahead.
Hi, it's been a really wonderful meeting. It was really fantastic to hear Justin and Caitlin. This is absolutely necessary and important. And, the curriculum is important to adjust and to change. If in parallel, you ever wanted to start a book club, an anti-racist book club, I would be thrilled to help you. So I'm the young adult librarian at the 67th Street Library. We have a tremendous amount of online programs, and I can, certainly get you the links from the NYPL, New York Public Library website. That Angie Thomas book you mentioned, well, before the closure, we had, that was our book club click, the Hate You Give, and we had one night we did the book, and then we had a screening of the movie at the branch. And the Schomburg Center has some great lists, some specifically for teens, and we could do fiction, nonfiction, and I'd be happy to help host if in conjunction with the the wonderful work you're doing. If you ever wanted to start a book club, I'd be thrilled. The current book club that our branch, 67th Street, is running online. It's usually around some manga and anime texts. We did do Pet, a recent one, but I'd be thrilled if you wanted to help. If you didn't want to put too much pressure on it, if you just want to maybe make a pick for a selection for 1 month, or you wanted more, I'd be happy to help, as little as much or help as you'd like. But we definitely have resources to help curate either reading lists, and we have we have a lot of apps. Currently the branch is open for grab and go, so you can request a book and pick it up. But some of our a lot of our books have available copies, multiple simultaneous available copies. So, you know, if the library only has a license for X number of copies for an ebook, you know, only a certain amount of people can check it out. But some of them we have essentially unlimited. So we could create a book club around that and have easier access for everyone. But I mean, it's just wonderful work. If there's any way I can help you, I'm happy to. And if there's anything you want to do in addition, I'm happy to support you.
I love the club idea. That sounds really awesome. I think it'd be a great way to connect kids our age and in like our area and read these like really important texts. So I like that.
So I'll send this to the host here, my email front with the library, and so I hope they can pass it on to you, and I hope I can help you as much as possible.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's totally a good idea, and I know that I definitely have a few friends, and Caitlin does as well, that would totally be interested in this. I think it'd be a great way to get it started. Awesome, thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you all.
Thank you, Jesse. I see Jack has his hand up, and then we'll move on to vote.
Yeah, I also go to Eleanor Roosevelt High School with Justin and Caitlin, so I can confirm everything they said is true. Although now, as Caitlin was saying, they are starting to put more books with diversity in our curriculum. I'm reading There, which I saw was on that list right now in my English class. But I think this is still important to help make sure that this continues for eternity, so that we make sure we have diverse and very good books of history within our curriculum. Caitlin and Justin came to me a few weeks ago, and so with this important work, and I thank them for that. And so I brought them to this committee, and I thank Peter for giving them this voice and this outlet so that they can do this fantastic work. So I thank you, Justin and Caitlin. And I think I heard there's a resolution on the floor or something, and if so, I would like to second that and move forward with that.
Yes, so Peter called the question, Jack just second. I see Taina has her hand up if you want to go real fast. But then Peter, I want to go back to you just so you could just reiterate your resolution, just so we're all on the same page, and then we can vote.
Yeah, I'll be very quick here. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Justin. That was incredibly informative and helpful. And as somebody who graduated high school in New York City Public School here in District 2, Baruch College Campus High School in 2001, it sounds like I read a lot more works by people of color back then. So not really sure what has happened, as many people have stated. Peter, if you could just, I think sort of equally important to us as a community board supporting, these great student efforts, I would love to make sure that we also try to connect them as best possible with folks at the Department of Education, really at Tweed, that can, sort of help them elevate this more broadly throughout the city. It sounds like that's a goal of theirs. And so if something like that can be included as well. And again, I love your idea, Peter, of having a follow-up sort of committee, sort of co-meeting with the Social Justice Committee. But I think really, I'd love to elevate their voices. You guys, this is incredibly powerful. And I would really just love to elevate your voices to sort of the powers that be at the Department of Education, hopefully connect you with other folks throughout the city doing this work. Thank you.
So Peter, can you just restate your impromptu resolution, and then we'll vote.
Great. Try to incorporate what Taina just said. CB8 supports and endorses the Diversify Our Narrative initiative, and including support for outreach to the Department of Education with regard to our district and throughout the city.
I like that. That's good wording. Any additions to the wording or changes or anything else we want to add? Seeing no hands, let's vote. So we know how voting works. I'll just say it again, just in case we forgot along the way. Raise your hand if you're voting no, abstaining, not voting for cause, or have anything else to say. Seeing no hands, I'll just read everyone's names again. We have Peter, we have Taina, we have Alita, we have Billy, we have Ed, we have Gail, we have Jack, we have Marco, we have Rebecca, we have Vanessa, and we have myself. So passes unanimously, guys. Congratulations. Again, board members will send you everything as well as the minutes after this meeting. I guess we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Well, let me just pick up one quick point, which is my proposal would be that we bring this up before the full community board at the next meeting. That'll be the third Wednesday of February. And to the extent it works for you, Justin and Caitlin, if you'd like to be available at that time to speak to it, we'd love to have you. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you, Jesse, for your support, both for what you do and for the way you're supporting this initiative. And I want to thank Taina, Rami, and frankly, everyone who participated tonight. I was very pleased with the session. I hope you were. And yes, I certainly accept the motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Peter. Will, just one last point. If you could just make sure that we get on the agenda, for a full board. I don't know how that works, but I'm sure you got it.
Yeah, as long as you guys vote on resolutions during your committee.
Can't hear you, Will.
You cannot hear me.
Now we can.
There you go.
Yeah, as long as you guys vote on resolutions and we get them in your minutes, or in your minutes on time, you'll be on the agenda for full board.
Thank you, Will. We're pretty punctual, so I'm sure that won't be an issue. So I guess we're adjourned. See you next month, everyone, or at the full board. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to DOE. Thank you to the French dual language program.
Yes.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.